Hey, good morning. Welcome to Designing Healthy Environments. I am here with Marty Brennan, architect at ZGF and lighting expert. Today we're going to talk about lighting and how that impacts our health. And so I am so happy to have Marty. I've known Marty for 20 something years, right? And it's just great to know that we've gone on this similar path of designing healthy environments. A little bit about Marty. He's a project architect and sustainability specialist at ZGF. He is passionate, as am I, about daylight and health and has published papers and software to help designers visualize circadian light. Marty is currently working on the Microsoft headquarters and a spectral lighting system for a neonatal intensive care unit. Do you have a question for Marty? Please ask as we have this talk. So welcome, Marty. Good morning. How are
Good
you?
morning. Thanks.
Very
It's great to be
good.
here, Alicia.
Yeah. So tell us about, the reason why I've been wanting to have you as a subject matter expert on the show to talk about lighting. But what really sparked it was this article that I read, and you have several articles published on lighting. And your most recent one, I think is your most recent one that was picked up by Well. It was titled, "The More We Understand Light, the More We Can Improve Health." And
Right.
I just think we should explore that and talk about what that means and why light health.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that, every animal on Earth responds to light, responds to daylight. And it just so happens if you're in sync with the natural rhythm of day and night, you have better sleep, which is probably the foundation of all health in modern society. And this helps to regulate all sorts of things like cortisol and melatonin, and which sets up your digestion, which sets up more health metrics. So, a lot of what we're trying to do is really just give you consistency of day and night. And in today's society, we kind of have two issues. One, during the day, if we're at work or working from home, a lot of times we don't have enough biological light to actually naturally reduce melatonin and wake you up. And then at night, a lot of times we're overlighting our eyes. So you're in bed with a little blue device, and it's putting, not a significant amount of light, but enough at nighttime to delay your sleep. And this is happening to teenagers. They're even starting to find down with babies.
Me, I'm guilty.
I know. So you can download Flux and there's Night Shift, and there's apps at least that'll help. But you talk to neuroscientists and they say, or sleep scientists, and they say, really try to turn the devices off a couple hours before bed. It actually will help you get into deep sleep, and all sorts of good things happen when you're in deep sleep.
Wow, even babies. Well, I guess that makes sense because newborns, especially now, the babies being born during the pandemic, it's like everybody wants to see the baby and it's all screen time, right?
It is a lot of screen time. Yeah,
It is.
no, it's a good point.
Yeah. So what got you into like this focus on lighting?
Yeah, so I was at the University of Washington for grad school in architecture, and there happened to be what was a daylighting lab. It was a daylighting lab that started in the 80s, and now it's called the Integrated Design Lab. And I really just fell into it. There were a couple of people there, Christopher Meek in particular, who's now the director. And just, so they had a whole set of courses on electric light, daylight. We would build little models. Architects would come in and we'd give consulting services, and we'd measure how much daylight's coming in through your skylight. We'd look at visual comfort. Is it glary? Is it comfortable? Because that's the number one thing of daylight, is you got to make sure there's no direct sun in your eye and people are upset. So, how can we make this really exciting, dramatic, yet comfortable and biologically, synchronizing space?
Yeah. Trying to remember, like, I was thinking of a project that I worked on early on at a firm, and it was a salon.
Hmm.
And we just like smothered it with light. It's like
Yeah.
all the no-nos, talk about energy consumption guzzler.
Right.
And it was right before I came across this article on green building, because I was early on in my career as an architect. I was contemplating just leaving the field as a whole, because I just it conflicted with what I believed in and
Right.
designing healthy environments. And so I'm like, what am I doing? I mean, don't get me wrong, the salon was beautiful, but it was just like flooded with light. And
Right.
it was a lesson learned early on in my career. But at that same time, I came across this article about
Yeah.
leadership and energy environmental design. And I was like, wow, there are other ways, other strategies that we can rethink about how we design.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
what's your opinion on LEED? And well, you're well accredited, right?
I am.
Yeah.
Yes. And long ago, I was LEED accredited. I let it lapse. I think I
Okay.
need to re-up on it. I think they're great. They're a set of tools that a lot of clients just respond to them. I'm starting to learn Fitwell, which I like it quite a bit. Just all of them have different, use cases for different clients. Whether you want something kind of a little simpler and quick versus something a little more intense. And they're great. They just get the conversation going. They kind of help gamify, the process, and people get pretty jazzed if they get 2 stars or points. Um, and I think they're converging around health. Health is becoming wasn't necessarily where LEED started out. I mean, you mentioned like back in the late 90s when LEED was coming out. What I remember, I was painting a building, and it was right when low VOC paints were coming out, because I'm pretty sensitive to chemicals. And it was so important to me, like that kind of galvanized sustainability for me was these healthy materials. And that was baked into the early LEED. But now I see LEED is embracing, obviously carbon, but also, health. And so they've teamed up with the IWBI. So now WELL is kind of under the same framework as LEED, which is interesting.
Yeah, and with well, you're not only working with the design world, but we also now have data from healthcare, right?
Right.
We have the healthcare experts also informing us on how we should, how design should go,
Right.
right? So one of the questions that I have is, as architects, and we're looking at these strategies, and this is your specialty, and what are the blind spots that architects may miss, or what are opportunities that we can
Sure.
look at when seeing these
Yeah,
elements?
I'd say, the number one thing is to try and maximize daylight where you have it, which I think architects actually are really good at. I think any architect I have ever met loves daylight and loves views and trying to open up facades. But I would say the roof is the fifth facade. So a lot of times we ignore skylights, and it's a great way to bring in light. It's a great spatial feature. Um, we usually shy away from them because of waterproofing details, but it's not that hard. um, the other thing I would say is a lot of architects don't always have a great relationship with the electric lighting designer. I think the lighting designer is a key person on a project,
Mhm.
and is somebody that should be your ally, and you should really seek out collaborations. And once you start to get to know lighting designers, you can get to know the manufacturers. A lot of the manufacturers will help customize lighting fixtures or develop lighting fixtures. I'm working on a project where we're developing a custom light, and just things start to open up at that point. So yeah, I think that's probably a good lesson for any project, is to collaborate and be really open to who those collaborators might be.
Yeah, and we definitely saw that it takes a certain team. It's such a, to me, I say it's such a dream when you have this team that's all, you know, all agrees on this mission. And,
Hmm.
we just completed the University of Chicago Color Center, which was, LEED Platinum, and also Living Building Materials Pedal.
Wow.
And I agree that working with the lighting designer and AP Monarch, we were the primary sustainability consultants for that. And but that is a project that really, once we can visit each other again, that they give tours, right, to
Okay.
be able to even feel, you can feel the difference of this type of building,
Right.
walking through it, the way natural light does hit you or hit the building and surfaces in
Right.
different areas. It was very intentional. And so it's just that it's really nice to see that happen. And can you talk about like why why we feel a certain way, like a natural daylight, or why we're so drained
Right.
with so much screen time? Like, what is it that makes us feel that way?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting that they discovered there's these cells in your eye, and it's the IPGRC, that they discovered it back in the 30s, and then somehow they forgot about it until like the 90s, and then you had all these different universities and studies where they identified that these cells they're ancient, with this ancient pathway into our brain that is most sensitive to blue light and a little bit of green, but mostly blue. And when you get that light, and you need a certain amount of it, you can't just have a very dim blue light. You need a pretty bright light. So the Wells standard would say you need 200 equivalent melanopic lux, and that translates into a good amount of light, and it's got to be at your eye. And there's even researchers that say these cells are kind of on the top part of your eye, so that when you're outside, a sky is naturally blue, a clear sky. And even an overcast sky looks white, but it's actually got it's full spectrum. So there's lots of blue light in it. And so we evolved under these skies, right, all over the world. What's interesting is to look at people's health on different latitudes in different parts of the world. If you live within 30 degrees of the equator, there's far less issues of depression, seasonal affective disorder, even less autism and schizophrenia. Like, all these issues start happening as you get further and further and further from the equator, and you get these darker and darker and darker winters. But though there are like gene pools that are very adapted, like Icelandic folks are actually, if your family's been in Iceland for 10,000 years, you're okay. Like, you're adapted pretty well to those extreme conditions. But when you look at the stats in, like, say, Canada, 40% of Canadians have trouble sleeping. And you have these huge, I live here in Seattle, where we have a very large amount of seasonal affective disorder. And it makes sense because we're very north. So we have dark winters, plus we're overcast and rainy. So you kind of get this double dip of just darkness. So, we're really tuned to this bright light, blue light in the morning, and then darkness at night. So, I think the dark sky movement is really important, that we reclaim, our night sky, and have that kind of magic and solace that, because it affects, light pollution affects animals, it affects humans. So yeah, it's really about this rhythm of night and day, and this blue light and no light.
Mm.
Yeah.
So then in your article, you also talk about this instrument that you use called WaveGo, right?
Yeah,
Can you
that's
talk
right.
a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so there's a company in Florida called Ocean Insight, and they've been around. They used to be called Ocean Optics, but they've been around for decades helping environmentalists measure all sorts of things. So in this case, they have developed a pretty affordable little spectrometer that you can take and walk, or you could use it in the field if you're commissioning. Say you design a project and you've got different color temperatures for your lights and you actually want to like validate the color temperature. This would be a good tool that you could go out and check that. And right now they're piloting this tool that has a new app that lets you basically turn it on, and you can then measure, say every minute you could measure. So it's called data logging. And so I've been taking it on hikes. So, just or working from home, I'll measure right now. I might set it up on a tripod here and just make sure, am I meeting the well standard right now? I can check that. And
yeah,
then just seeing the diversity of light indoors, but then really outdoors, so when you take it on a walk and I usually hold it about here. So it's
okay,
simulating the light coming to my eye. Um, it's very view dependent. If you look north, south, east, west, if you're in a forest, if you're in a grocery store, if you're at the beach, um, it's very different readings. So just starting to understand all those different, one of the geeky terms they use is photic histories. Photic means it's like photons, like light. And your photic history is really it's like if you have a little tracker that tracks how many your steps. In this
okay.
case, you're tracking your light. So what
Oh,
is the light incident, your biological light, all day long? And then there's other like the Lighting Research Center in Troy, New York. They'll measure your photic history, and then they'll measure your movement, so they can start to cross-reference these two metrics. And then they'll have you do sleep, you'll keep a sleep log, and they can do all kinds of analysis that, are you getting, a really healthy cycle of light that's then improving your sleep.
mm-hmm. So before I forget, I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about like spending, you're in Seattle and you get this certain amount of light, right?
Right.
That is impacting people's mental health even.
Yeah.
So in architecture, since we do spend 90% of our time indoors, but nowadays in the last 4 months, we spend,
More.
98% of
Right.
our time indoors. So how do you change this in the architecture so that people can feel better?
It's an awesome question, because it really is true that we live indoors as a species now. Well, I think you can start very simply by, well, as an architect, the massing of a building, obviously shallower floor plates and, as much as you can. You look at how architects designed 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it was around daylight. We had taller floor to floor, we had bigger
Mhm.
windows, shallower spaces, and we brought that daylight in. And then, once you bring daylight in, like you said about the salon, being mindful of window treatments, all the different ways you could have, say, shading devices or scrims or curtains. I mean, there's a lot of great solutions to just calm that light, or even sometimes translucent. We use films. And so, yeah, I think that's number one, is bringing in the daylight. The second thing is work with the electric lighting designer, and how can the electric lights supplement and complement the daylight. And the prices are coming down. There's more and more manufacturers now that are doing tunable lighting.
Mhm.
You don't absolutely need a tunable light, but if the budget allows, and hopefully within a few years it's going to get really accessible. um, you can then have a lighting that knows your latitude, and it can change the intensity and the color during the day.
Yeah.
So the key is at night that you really just dim your lights. That's number one. And then if you can, at home, or have a warmer color temperature. So basically you just don't want that blue energy,
Yeah.
so ironically incandescent, which is is terrible from an energy standpoint,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful light, obviously, but it's high color rendering, it's full spectrum, and has very little blue in it. It has a little bit, but very little. So, that it's a good spectrum actually for nighttime. And as we moved into fluorescent was much cooler, more blue. So that's
Mhm.
terrible for like before
Right.
bed. And then LED also started out very blue. I mean, it
Hmm.
interesting. It came out of the
And
Illinois,
very expensive.
Champaign-Urbana. uh, now there's some great LED lights that have multiple chips so that you can alternate the color temperature and change the spectrum in essence. Um, so I think there's a lot of strategies to both with just simply with daylight and then with electric light. The controls are getting, I think, more accessible. Like there's a lot of Bluetooth and cloud-based tools where you can change the light with your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all the lights are digitally addressable, so you can have really cool kind of setups in different whether it's workplace or healthcare, to just totally change all the light scenes.
Mm. I have a comment here from Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne. Thank you for watching. Well, she agrees because she said she was in Alaska for 3 years and she felt very, very
Yeah,
sad. And that's very unusual for Yvonne because she is a she is a powerhouse energy, and so that's really impactful
it
to
is.
know. Um, you have a couple slides that you sent me,
Hmm.
images that you sent me. Do you wanna share and maybe
Sure.
explain what that is? Okay,
Yeah, we could just walk through them.
yeah, let me see if I can do this right. Aha, there we go. Who's this little birdie? Okay, go ahead. Circadian rhythms.
Yeah, so we've touched on this, but this is just a diagram showing 24 hours of a day. At the top is midnight, at the bottom is noon. And really, we're going for darkness during the night as much as you can. You don't want any light while you're sleeping. I mean, maybe a night light, but that's about it. And then come dawn, you basically start, that light starts out a bit warmer, which is okay to just kind of ease in, which is simulating what naturally occurs with sunrise, sunset, is kind of a very warm, beautiful light. But then the light, starts getting cooler. There's a lot of ways to do this. There's no perfect recipe. I think that's what we're starting to get into, is we want to start measuring daylight around the world and understand different health outcomes based on different recipes of when, is seasonality a good thing? Is winter, and maybe for some people it is, but for other people, winter lighting is not a good idea, like we just talked about. But
Yeah.
really at noon, you have naturally it's the most amount of light. And can be the bluest amount of light. So yeah, this is just showing also just your body is naturally changing states during that time, and from when you're in deepest sleep to your highest alertness, more towards noon, and that melatonin and cortisol is changing throughout the day.
Wow. Let's see what we have here.
So this is just a diagram to show if you're going for the WELL standard. They've since, with the pilot, given some other options. That this is kind of showing the version 1, where the goal is to get this light really from 9 a.m. to 1. That's really important. Is this is about synchronizing your clock every day, and you want to set your clock early, not late. And what that does, depending when you set your clock, it can advance it or delay it. So you want to advance it. And in this case, getting that light early. The 200 is for equivalent melanopic lux. And like I said before, that's it, it's a good amount of light. It's not always easy in all environments to hit that target. And the graphic is showing that we're really looking at the light from every source. So daylight from the window, the overhead light, the task light on your desk, your monitor. I mean, even your phone, all these devices are sending light to your eye and are going to have a biological effect, regardless, and, we usually think of light in a visual sense. Like I see it, I see the color red, I see the color blue. This whole idea is 100% non-visual. There's no image or formation of an image in your mind. It's just regulating a clock. So this was, I mentioned taking this spectrometer, this waveGo, on a walk. And so I started out indoors one day, not unlike this. And you're really seeing, I graphed the light because it's kind of cool. The device, it either can send the data to cloud, or you can download it to really any device. You can bring it into Excel, and you're basically seeing the full visible spectrum. And on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, you're seeing the intensity of the light. So the first one is just where I'm sitting right now, working from home. And you can see it's the lowest, amount of light relative to being outdoors. And in all of these, I never needed sunglasses. So the next one, I walked to the beach, and that was pretty stunning. It was, I was looking away from the sun to the west, and you can see there's a lot of blue in that. The blue is the highest amount of energy. Then there's green, then there's red. And that's actually, that profile, that's a really common sky profile. That's, around the world, we call that D65 in lighting. And that roughly correlates to 6,500 Kelvin. So that's a CCT of 6,500. This is actually more towards, like, I think this is like 8,000 Kelvin in reality. We use these numbers in architecture and lighting, but going outside, it's much more variable. It's never the same. The forest, now it's shifted to more green and a bit more red and infrared. And then I measured a single leaf, and you can really see the green. And that's because it's the leaf is absorbing all the blue and all the red for photosynthesis.
So in a building, what would be the sweet spot, and to merge these four, or just like what's realistic?
Right. I mean, I think that's the fun part, is that, we're still learning. I think there'd be a case, you might want a forest room, or a time of day where maybe the light is a forest. Green is really important to our biology, and our cones. Our visual system, our cones, are most sensitive to green. And so then there's a whole bunch of psychological effects of color, obviously. But it's a good question. I definitely use daylight as the gold standard and try and mimic it if I can't actually bring it in. But I think there's all kinds of cases. We do children's hospitals where we'll allow the kids to change the color of the light in their room, and it's it's partially the just the fun of it. To have the ability to change your color. But I think we need a lot more research, honestly, just of the health outcomes that are related. There's a whole biophilic kind of story that goes, obviously, walking through a forest. And there's so many other things that go with this, like the negative ions at the beach, or the smelling terpenes in the forest, which is the whole forest bathing idea. So how can we bring the outdoors indoors? Because if we're indoors all this time, and the outdoors is such a sensory experience, how can we start layering all these different textures and colors and scent, smells, and can we?
Let's see what we have here.
So this is just showing a snapshot working from home, and you can see there's a spike in the blue, the green, and the red. And that's very common from an LED light source. In this case, it's mostly the monitor light, trying to create a full spectrum. So, you know, it's not a bad light source, but, and I have a little bit of daylight and a little bit of overhead light.
Yeah. And your surfaces are white, right? And so that has a lot to do with it
That's
too,
a big
right?
deal. You know,
Yeah.
reflecting light is huge. I mean, just from an energy standpoint, but also it's more agnostic in the sense it's neutral. So if you have a color changing light fixture, if your wall's red, it's not going to reflect blue. You know, so if you pick a color, the white allows you to have let the color come from the light source. You know, so it just gives you a lot more flexibility as a designer. And
Yeah, and now with buildings, we're talking carbon reduction, like, we need
yeah,
to put that on turbo. And with that came timber buildings,
right.
right? Timber
Yep.
mass buildings.
Yep.
So it's all innovative, really.
Yeah, and you know, it's everyone does the timber building and they want to just see timber everywhere. But you know, I've seen some great workplace in Vancouver where they painted the wood white. And if you go back to you know, you see some of these historic wood buildings, not historic, but like say in the Northwest, you know, there's buildings that are 100 years old where they used to paint the wood white and it reflects the light. Now you don't see that beautiful wood color, but
Mhm.
the ceiling is the most important reflective surface in a building. So it's something to consider. Oh,
Okay.
so yeah, so here's that same profile at the beach. And you can see that it's really spiking and there's kind of this mountain of in the curve up in the
Yeah.
violet, blue, and cyan. And you can see it in the image. There's the blue sky, it's reflecting on the blue water, and really the whole scene is washed in this color. A really fun metric is dominant color, and I didn't really know it till I got this device. What it is, well, it's what color is your eye, your cones most sensitive to? So in this scene, this 476 nanometer is the dominant color, and when you look at you kind of squint your eye and look at the image, that color is the dominant color you perceive.
Mm.
Which is just fascinating because it's not the largest amount of energy of that's coming to your eye. It's the one your eye sees the brightest.
Now, okay, this may be a dumb question, and I never really thought of it this way. Does eye color matter in this study?
It shouldn't, no, but
Okay.
you know, it's yeah. There is a. It's interesting. The human perception, visual perception, there is a range. You know, we all don't see the same thing. We all don't see the same color. There's kind of a statistical cloud of what we all see. Some people see more colors. Some people, a lot of, you know, and some men are a lot more men are colorblind than women. They tend to usually see blue, you know, and then they might not see green or red. Um, so what's really fascinating when they discovered, I was talking about this IPGRC that sees the blue light, blind people have it.
Okay.
So, you know, when they really figured this stuff out, it was that, you know, blind people, you know, had these cells so that they were able to synchronize their clock naturally. And people who don't have the IPGRCs have really difficult time. You know, they might sleep for 20 hours and then they might be awake for, you know, days
Hmm.
because they don't have this synchronizing rhythm.
Hmm. Let's see. Forest.
Yeah,
Okay.
the forest is fun. You know, again, you see that dominant color now is now this kind of yellow green. And
Mhm.
that's, you know, just simply that a lot of that blue light is actually being absorbed by the leaves in the trees, and a lot of the red is absorbed. So you now, green is basically more or less useless to plants. They can't use green, so they reflect it. And there's definitely got to be a biological and biophilic kind of story there, because you know we see green brightest, and trees reflect it.
I think that's the last of the images, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, that was great. That was to be able to see that study
It was
there.
fun.
I think, I mean, how long have you been doing this lighting design, this focus on lighting? It's been a while, right? And
Yeah, it's probably like, yeah, 11 years or so.
yeah,
Yeah.
all right. I do have questions on, so as architects, we work with a lot of key decision makers, right? And it could be anyone from the CEO, the sometimes it's a board we have to talk to, the executive board, or then it's an owner's rep or facilities managers. So
Yeah,
what message do you have for these key decision makers when
sure. I
considering
mean,
lighting design?
it's it's an awesome question. I mean, if you're talking to a CEO or a board or some key decision maker, a lot of times recruitment is a huge thing, right? And you're trying to retain and attract the best of the best. And there's been many studies, but there was one that came out of Harvard maybe a year ago that the top office perks are daylight and air, right? Clean air, awesome daylight. No, that's it. Like, drop the mic. Like, every time, that's what people want. It's and what was interesting in the study, there's this whole fad with all the big tech companies, like, oh, we've got Nerf football in our workplace, and we have all these games, and I mean, all that's gone with COVID, but that didn't matter to people. What mattered was really simple things, and I would say acoustics is
Endless amount of
probably
coffee and
right.
beer.
Yeah, exactly. So attract and retain. If you can tell the story of health and carbon, that's then now you're talking resilience. That's
Yeah,
speaking to a lot of people. And I think there's the other side of the equation is just the equity side of this. Can you provide that to everybody? Like, when we're doing these hospitals, it's really hard to get the daylight to the nursing station, because a lot
right.
of times they're these deep floor plate buildings and they shove a lot of program away from the window. Of course, the patients are on the window and they should be in the families.
Mhm.
Um, but the nurses, so how do we
They're there
provide
like
for them?
hours and hours.
Hours,
Yeah.
yeah. And a lot of them are working night shift, and that's a whole nother thing, for another time. But the World Health Organization looks at night shift work as a carcinogen. I mean, it's similar to smoking.
Oh, wow.
It's so unnatural that it will lead to premature death.
Mm,
So that's its own thing. Um, if I'm talking to somebody at facilities, that's totally different thing. They want simple controls. You don't want to hand over a building that's impossible to operate. And
right.
so finding a way to bring them on board early. They
Mhm.
have to kind of be a champion. They have to buy into it, get excited about it. And so commissioning is really important. I mean, we've had to commission things twice, just
Mhm.
to and we've had, early on, we brought in partners from different labs that could help us commission and really just dial it in. So that's an example of just take each audience, each stakeholder individually and try and address their concerns, because it's usually either it's money.
It's money,
This
right?
looks
Well, that's
expensive.
what they're thinking, right? I think
Yeah,
that's maybe it's a wrong assumption, but it's always like, okay, what's it gonna cost us? But
yeah.
to see the long-term investments, and what are those?
Well, and when you put it in perspective of like the $333, if it's $300 for labor and it's $30 to run the building, whatever, it's obviously people are everything. So if you can
Mhm.
even slightly improve the health outcomes of your workforce or your patients, or people going through your airport, you're going to see that return.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. That's a great point. Thank you for that. No, this is great. I mean, yeah, we could completely keep on going and
Oh yeah,
talking about but I'll post your article.
cool. Thanks.
So this live talk will be on LinkedIn, and then along with your article. And so any other questions that viewers have, just please send it our way. And so next week we will continue on our Designing Healthy Environments talk with Tom Bassett-Dilly. He is owner, president of TBD Architects, and he is known for passive house certified projects for residential. So I know he's got a lot of, and he works on net zero projects, and I'm excited to talk to him and just hear that perspective, because last week we were talking about passive house large scale for commercial, and talking about the energy performance, in a large scale buildings, and taking the passive house principles when they were originally designed for residential purposes, but now it's stepped up a notch to, the large commercial buildings. So yeah, that's what we have coming next week. And any closing comments, Marty?
Oh, closing comments. Well, yeah, get outdoors. I think,
Get
that's
outdoors.
get
Yeah, I
outdoors.
mean, especially since we've been working from home for 4 months now. I don't know if that's the case for you, maybe
Yeah.
5. Yeah, 4 months.
Mm.
And we just really need to get that sunlight, and as much of it,
Well, get
and
your steps, get your
get
negative ions.
get your steps in. So yeah, well, thank you. It's great seeing you,
Yeah, you too.
and
Thank you.
hopefully see you in person soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right. So thank you everyone for watching. Like I said, this will be posted on LinkedIn and Instagram, and you can check us out and ask us questions on how to design healthy environments. That's what we do, design healthy for you, for Earth, and for all. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.